Hi everyone, welcome to class with Professor Mead. Today we're going to talk about Women Say I Do to Education Then Marriage by Leslie Mann. Our think, pair, share for today. Are women with degrees more or less likely to wed than their less educated partners? Fill in the blank about educated women. And then in terms of marriage, what are some of the key differences today compared to the 1950s? What are some of the key differences between black and white women? And between educated men and uneducated women. So the first thing, as usual, you'll notice the theme that we talk about methods, right? So this was a long-term study, and it began all the way back in the 1970s. So it went on for about 50 years. It omitted the data for Hispanic and Asian women. We're talking about black and white women only. This is pretty typical. When you do research, you have to narrow down groups, right? So in research, it's easiest to compare black and white in terms of racial identities, and so often Hispanics and other ethnic groups will be left out. It's not through a sense of discrimination. It's because you can only manage to do so much research and include so many people and still be able to complete a project. So oftentimes, because most of the literature historically has been between blacks and whites, that's what you still see trending today because there's already data on it and you can make that comparison. And then of course they track the marriages and education of black and white women and men. So some of the findings overall for this article, what we found is that in today's day and age, for the first time, women with college degrees are actually more likely to be married by the time they turn 40 than their lesser educated counterparts. In other words, historically, uneducated women were more likely to be married, and educated women were less likely to be married by the time they turned 40. Women who are educated tend to marry later, but they actually marry more often if you wait and do the data collection by the time they're 40. So if you wait until they're in the 40s, if you tracked it when they were 18, 19, 20, you're going to see that uneducated women are more likely to be married. And the data, it kind of reflects a change in the expectation of women and an expectation of how their husbands feel about them. Educated women are more likely than their less educated sisters to stay married. So educated women get married later and stay married, have better incomes, and are less likely to have children before marrying. So a lot of times when I'm in class, my students will talk to me about their culture and how their families, when, often they are first generation college students, and they will be in their mid to late 20s and they haven't married and they're not looking to marry until they're finished with college and start their careers. But because within certain communities, people who are less likely to marry often see their children marry at younger ages, and historically both women and men married at younger ages. A lot of students today, especially at Cal State Long Beach, where I teach, will often say that their parents, their family, their friends will ask them why they're not married, when they're going to get married, that they should get married, or even that maybe they're risking their chances of finding a husband by getting an education. One of the reasons why I feel this article is really important, because it pertains to a lot of women and it gives a lot of young women today rationale and justification, like real justification for what they did. So they're able to explain to their friends and family why they're not married yet. In addition to that, later marriages are very much a reflection of our poorer economy. If you don't believe that you can achieve the middle class life and get a home, you are less likely to marry and have children. So what it's showing is that recession times or bad economies not so much prevent people, they say prevent, but because people are more likely to make the decision not to marry because they're waiting to achieve those middle class goals before they get married. So they want to have a college degree, have a home maybe, or at least have their career before they decide to get married. By age 40, we see 75% of college educated women are married, 70% of high school graduates or women with some college are married, and 60% of high school graduates are married. Today, men presume that their wives will work. Women are not necessarily discriminated within the workforce for getting married, but women are still very much discriminated against for having children. And do absolutely reach the glass ceiling, and having children tends to stall their careers and their ability to climb the ladder and also to make more money. So marriages historically in the 50s, what we would have said traditional marriages. Remember that traditional marriages are from 1950 to 1960. Prior to that, we would have called it patriarchal marriage. After that, it starts to turn into the communal companionship marriage. But in the 50s, women had to choose between education and a family. They could not be highly educated and have a career and a family. And the ideology, right, the idea was that college educated women would become spinsters, that no man would want them. And even if women did go to college, which was more likely in an upper middle class family, they went to college to be able to find a husband that also had a college degree that could afford them their lifestyle, their middle class or upper middle class lifestyle. But once they finished college, they were never expected really to work. They were just expected to become educated housewives. They were getting their, what we joke around as MRS degree or Mrs. degree. And at the time, of course, husbands expected their wives to stay home, and women could very much get fired for getting married. We also saw with, black women in the early 1900s that women would announce, black and white women, white women would announce their engagement and quit their high-profile jobs at the same time. So comparing black women and men to white women and men, black women are less likely to marry than white women overall, and college-educated black women are a little bit more likely to marry. They have a much smaller marriage pool of eligible partners because black women tend to have, that are educated, tend to not find as many black men who have the same level of education or slightly more, which is what we expect in our gender roles in society. But black men who are educated are also more likely to pick a woman who doesn't have as much education or a woman who is not black. For men, a college degree does affect their chances of getting married. And we do know that men without a college degree are less likely to get married. So today, and for a long time actually, but more so today, marriage is perceived as an achievement, right? So we hit these adult markers in our life, and marriage is very much one of them. Some of these adult markers, getting your driver's license, graduating from high school, getting your first job, getting your first, getting a college degree, getting married, having a baby. These are adult markers and achievements. So many times somebody will ask something like, well, all my friends have already had babies, but they're not in college. One of the reasons why women who are uneducated or who are poor are more likely to have children young is because it's one of the things that's accessible to them as an adult marker of achievement, an adult achievement marker. Because they can have a baby, they may not necessarily be able to get married or especially have a wedding with as expensive as they are today. And if they're not going to get a college degree, they know that that's also not something that is attainable for them for an adult marker. And so having a child is one of those few things that's still available to poor men and women as a, as a way to mark themselves or to show an achievement of moving into adulthood. Historically or previously, college would have been seen as a place that you went to go find a partner for marriage. We don't look at college that way anymore. But what is a marriage market? So a marriage market is the available pool of people who you could consider to be marriage material, right? So in our society, we tend to expect men to be a little bit more than women, especially when it comes to marriage. A little bit more educated, not a ton, right? You can't have huge variations. A little bit taller, make a little bit more money. You make about the same amount of money. You might have the same or similar education levels. So say, for example, the woman has a bachelor's degree and the guy has a master's, or they both have a bachelor's degree and he makes just a little bit more money than the woman. Those people who fall in that spectrum, who are around your age, of course, men are supposed to be a little bit older. We're talking about heteronormative relationships here, obviously, right? Those people are in your marriage market. If you are gay or lesbian, then you have a smaller marriage pool, so your marriage market is smaller because there's simply less people that you have to choose from. But all of the other indicators tend to be similar. So you'll have, two men who make about the same amount of money or have similar types of education levels. When you run into problems is when you see where a woman has much more education than a man, like a woman has a PhD and a guy has a high school diploma. That's much less common, especially because, as society says, men are supposed to be a little bit more than women in a heteronormative society. It is very difficult for men to be able to reconcile that difference with their own masculinity, right? Or machismo, right? We would call it. So individuals enter into the marriage market armed with resources, right? It's this exchange theory that they're using. Remember, this is not a sociological theory, it's an economics theory. Exchange theory is, I have this, you have that, let's exchange, like, are we a good fit, right? So what resources do I have? Am I good looking? Do I have money? Do I have a good wage? Do I have an education? I'm looking for somebody comparable, and you're looking in the marriage market to find somebody comparable to you. One of the terms that I always think of that's a very, very old or antiquated religious term, you might hear a grandma say it still, is somebody who is equally yoked. And that's kind of what they're talking about. Somebody who's similar enough to you that you can just naturally get along, because it's not going to cause additional problems with a huge difference in they're usually talking about religious views and racial groups. Being equally yoked today, though, your race is less important than where you grew up. So you can be completely different racial groups, but if you grow up in a similar community, you're very similar culturally. Okay, quick review, quick lecture, huh? Are women with degrees more or less likely to wed than their less educated counterparts? Educated women marry, have better, are less likely to. And then in terms of marriage, what are some of the key differences between today and the 50s, between black and white women, and between uneducated men and women? I tried to do a paper marriage market. I don't know if you've ever seen the Shanghai marriage market. This is where parents or people will basically write like a resume for their kids. I showed a picture in the beginning. It's your name, your age, your nationality, what kind of job you have, the income that you have, those types of things. And you go to this market and you look at all these lists, you pick somebody, and hopefully find somebody to marry. So I thought it was pretty good, that it would work out as an in-class activity, so we could kind of practice in a fun way the marriage market. I always do in-class activities. This one was a complete disaster. It did not work out at all. I tried modifying it through the years. So, in trying to do things for classrooms that we, highlight the concept, or we review concepts in class or online, some things work and some things don't. I thought I would share with you this one and how it just totally didn't work. It was chaos, didn't make sense. It was kind of hard to do. But I thought, that's fun and interesting to hear that things don't always work out when a teacher tries to do something new and interesting.